Hello, everyone. When I first met Charlotte, it felt as though the universe had conspired to bring us together. At the time, I was 28, a software engineer making steady progress in my career, while she was 26, a talented artist with a smile that could light up even the darkest room. We crossed paths at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend, where she introduced herself with a warm laugh and a glass of wine in hand. That evening, I couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about her, a blend of effortless charm, sharp intelligence, and quick wit that kept me completely captivated. Within a few months, we were inseparable. Charlotte embodied everything I had ever hoped to find in a partner. She was imaginative, loving, and unwaveringly supportive of my ambitions. We spent countless late nights envisioning the future together, dreaming about the house we'd own and the family we'd create. 2 years later, I proposed, barely managing to finish the question before she burst into tears and said yes. In that moment, I genuinely believed I was the luckiest man alive. Our wedding was nothing short of a fairy tale, a picturesque ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley. Charlotte looked breathtaking in her lace gown, and as she walked down the aisle, I struggled to hold back tears. Friends and family surrounded us with love and joy, and I thought that day would forever mark the beginning of our perfect journey together. But looking back now, I realized the cracks were already starting to form, even if I couldn't see them then. Charlotte and I built what seemed like an ideal life. I continued to excel at work, eventually earning a senior position at my firm. Meanwhile, Charlotte pursued her passion for art, hosting gallery exhibitions, and even selling a few of her pieces. We bought a charming three-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Seattle, complete with a garden that Charlotte adored. Life appeared to be everything we had dreamed of, or so I believed. The first few years of our marriage felt blissful. Charlotte was my anchor, always there to celebrate my successes and comfort me in moments of failure. We laughed together, traveled the world hand in hand, and envisioned a lifetime of shared dreams. I felt proud to have her as my wife. She had a way of connecting with people, effortlessly winning over strangers with her charm. But hindsight can be a cruel teacher. Now, I can see the subtle signs I overlooked. Charlotte often kept her phone close, brushing off my questions as a matter of privacy. She had a few close male friends, which I didn't think much of at the time because I trusted her completely. Trust. It's such a fragile thing, isn't it? It takes years to build, but only seconds to destroy. Everything shifted one crisp autumn evening, 2 weeks after our 5th anniversary. Charlotte came home with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mixture of joy and nervousness. She sat me down in the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for mine. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice unsteady. "I'm pregnant." My heart nearly burst with happiness. I scooped her up from the couch and spun her around, laughing like a kid who'd just been given the best gift of his life. Becoming a father was something I had always dreamed about, and now that dream was coming true. Charlotte seemed relieved by my reaction, and for the next few months, we floated in a bubble of joy. We decorated the nursery together, went at every doctor's appointment, and playfully debated baby names. For a while, it felt like we had never been closer. But there were fleeting moments, tiny cracks in our perfect world, that unsettled me. Charlotte started stepping out of the room to take late-night calls, brushing off my questions with vague explanations about gallery clients or friends seeking advice. I didn't press her for answers. Why would I? She was my wife, and I trusted her completely. The day our son was born remains etched in my memory as the happiest of my life. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I was overwhelmed by a love I had never known. He had Charlotte's delicate nose and her bright, captivating blue eyes. I felt a surge of excitement, imagining all the moments I couldn't wait to experience as he grew. We named him James. I silently vowed to be the best father I could possibly be. For the first few weeks, life felt like a dream. Charlotte seemed to glow with a new radiance, and James brought a fresh, vibrant energy into our lives. Everything felt perfect until the first seed of doubt was planted. It happened during a family visit, when Charlotte's mother made an offhand comment while holding James. "He looks just like one of Charlotte's old friends," she chuckled. "What was his name? Liam?" The room seemed to freeze. Charlotte's face drained of color in a way I'd never seen before. She quickly laughed it off, making a light-hearted joke about how all babies look alike. But for the rest of the evening, she avoided meeting my eyes, and that avoidance gnawed at me. That night, as Charlotte slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. A strange, sinking feeling settled in my gut. Something wasn't right, but I wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. For the first time in years, I felt an unsettling crack in the foundation of our marriage. Little did I know, that crack was about to widen into an unbridgeable chasm. In the days that followed her mother's comment, the air between us grew heavy. At first, I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But no matter how hard I tried, the unease clung to me. Every time I looked at James, I found myself searching his face, his bright blue eyes and delicate features, and wondering why they didn't quite resemble mine. It was like a voice in the back of my mind kept whispering doubts I wasn't ready to hear. Charlotte's behavior only fueled my growing suspicions. She became more distant, her laughter less frequent, her smile strained. She started spending more time on her phone, often stepping into another room to take calls or send texts. When I entered unexpectedly, she would quickly set her phone down and offer me a tight, forced smile. When I asked her about it, she claimed it was nothing, just gallery clients or friends reaching out. But after 5 years of marriage, I could tell when she was lying. One evening, as Charlotte was giving James his bath, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it without thinking, and the preview that flashed on the screen made my stomach drop. The message was from someone named M and read, "Can't stop thinking about last time. Miss you." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. My heart raced, torn between fury and disbelief. I wanted to grab the phone, unlock it, and read every word, but a part of me froze. What if I was wrong? What if I was jumping to conclusions? A moment later, Charlotte walked into the kitchen, James wrapped snugly in a towel. She froze when she saw me standing near her phone, her eyes darting between me and the device. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice overly casual. I held up the phone, my expression cold. "Who's M?" Her face went pale for a split second before she forced a nervous laugh. "Just a friend from the gallery," she said. "We've been working on an exhibit together." I didn't believe her. Not for a second, but I didn't push, not yet. I handed her the phone and walked out of the room, my mind racing. If she was lying, I needed proof. I couldn't confront her without something concrete. The next day, while Charlotte was out running errands, I did something I'd never imagined myself doing. I invaded her privacy. Using the passcode I'd memorized months ago, I unlocked her phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, searching for the thread with M. What I found shattered me. The texts were laced with flirtation, innuendos, and references to late-night meetings. One message stopped me cold. "I'm scared he'll find out. What if the baby really isn't his?" My hands shook so violently that I could barely hold the phone. I reread the message over and over, hoping I was misunderstanding, but the words were undeniable. Charlotte had been unfaithful, and there was a very real chance that James wasn't mine. Confronting her that evening was the hardest thing I've ever done. After James had fallen asleep and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher, I sat down across from her. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but the moment she looked at me, her expression shifted. She must have seen the storm brewing in my eyes, because her face turned wary. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her phone down. I didn't sugarcoat it. "I know about him," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I read your texts." Her eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as though she were gasping for words that wouldn't come. "Alex, I can explain," she began, her voice trembling. "Explain what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "That you've been lying to me? Sneaking around behind my back? That James might not even be mine?" My voice was louder than I intended, each word cutting like a blade. Charlotte crumbled under the weight of my words, bursting into tears and covering her face with trembling hands. "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "It only happened a couple of times, and I ended it months ago. I didn't mean for this to happen, Alex. I love you." Her words rang hollow, a lifeless echo of the vows we had once exchanged. Didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, my voice rising with anger. You didn't mean to betray me? To lie to me? To drag me into raising another man's child? How do you expect me to believe anything you say now? She didn't respond, her sobs filling the silence between us. I stood up and began pacing the room, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. I wanted to shout, to throw something, to demand answers she couldn't give. Instead, I stopped in front of her, my voice cold and steady. We're getting a paternity test, I said firmly. I want the truth. And if James isn't mine, God help you, Charlotte. The days that followed were a blur of tense silence. Charlotte tried to apologize, tried to reach out to me, but I couldn't hear her. My focus was solely on the paternity test, which I scheduled as quickly as possible. When the results finally came in, they confirmed my worst fears. I was not James's biological father. Charlotte broke down when I showed her the results, sobbing and begging for my forgiveness. But I couldn't find it in me to forgive. My heart was shattered, my trust obliterated. All I could think about was how to make her pay for what she had done. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom, staring at the cold, clinical truth written on the paternity test results. As the reality sank in, a new thought took root, a dark and consuming one. Charlotte had destroyed my life, my dreams, and my faith in love. Now it was my turn to destroy hers. Revenge wasn't just an idea, it felt like a necessity. The day after receiving the test results, I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Everywhere I turned, I was haunted by memories of the life I thought I had, a life that was nothing but a lie. The nursery we had decorated together, the family photos on the walls, the little moments that now felt tainted. I packed a bag, kissed James on the forehead for what I thought might be the last time, and walked out the door. Charlotte followed me into the driveway, tears streaming down her face. "Alex, please," she cried. "We can work through this. Don't throw away everything we've built." I didn't even turn around. "You already threw it away," I said coldly, climbing into the car and driving off. That night, I checked into a hotel, feeling numb and adrift. But as I lay on the stiff, unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, my anger began to solidify. Charlotte hadn't just betrayed me. She had stolen years of my life. She had humiliated me and left me to unknowingly raise another man's child. I wasn't just going to leave quietly. She needed to face the full weight of what she had done. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. Her name was Lisa, a sharp, no-nonsense professional who listened intently as I recounted everything. By the time I was done, her expression was one of quiet fury. "You have a strong case," Lisa said, "but be prepared. This is going to get ugly. Paternity fraud cases are rare, and they tend to attract a lot of attention." "That's fine," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "Let it get ugly. She deserves it." Filing the lawsuit was a grueling process. Every lie, every deception, every financial expense I had taken on under the assumption that James was my son had to be documented. A week later, Charlotte was served with the papers, and the fallout began almost immediately. Charlotte's initial reaction was shock, followed by frantic denial. She called me repeatedly, leaving voicemail after voicemail, begging me to drop the lawsuit. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded in one. "I'll do anything you want, just please don't ruin my life." But her life was already unraveling. News of the lawsuit spread quickly after a local journalist picked up the story, turning her private infidelity into a public scandal. Friends and family took sides, her parents were horrified, and her gallery dropped her, unwilling to be associated with the drama. And then there was M. The mysterious man turned out to be Liam, an old flame of Charlotte's and, as it turned out, a married coworker. When I confronted him, he cut ties with Charlotte immediately, making it clear he wanted nothing to do with her or James. That left Charlotte alone to shoulder the fallout. I was methodical in my efforts to erase Charlotte from my life entirely. I sold our house, liquidated my assets, and carefully moved money into accounts she couldn't touch. Every step I took was deliberate, designed to ensure that when I was finished, there would be nothing left for her to cling to. The day we faced each other in court felt surreal. Charlotte sat across the room from me, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. The confident, radiant woman I had once fallen in love with was gone. In her place was a shadow, weighed down by guilt and shame. She avoided my gaze as the lawyers laid everything bare. The paternity test results, the incriminating text messages, the financial records. It was all there for the judge to see. The ruling was in my favor. Charlotte was ordered to pay restitution for the financial burden she had placed on me. But I knew she didn't have the money. Not after losing her job and most of her support system. The victory felt hollow. It wasn't about the money, after all. It was about making her face the reality of what she had done, about finding closure for myself. After the court proceedings, I disappeared. I had planned my exit meticulously, ensuring that no one, not Charlotte, not anyone we knew, could find me. I moved to a new state, adopted a new identity, and cut all ties with my past. Social media accounts were deleted. My phone number was changed, and I started over. For 5 years, I lived a quiet, uneventful life, far removed from the chaos Charlotte had brought into mine. But even as I built this new life, the memories lingered. I thought about James sometimes, wondering how he was growing up and whether he would ever learn the truth about his parentage. There was a pang of guilt in those moments, but I reminded myself he wasn't my responsibility. He wasn't my son. As for Charlotte, she became nothing more than a ghost, a painful fragment of my past that I never expected to encounter again. That changed one cold December evening, exactly 5 years to the day since I had walked out of the home we once shared. My phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering, unsure who it could be. But when I finally picked up, the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. "Alex," Charlotte said, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you. It's about James." For a moment, I froze, the past crashing over me like a tidal wave. I had spent 5 years rebuilding my life, free of her lies and betrayal. Yet here she was, pulling me back into her world with just a few words. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone icy, bracing myself for whatever she was about to say. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking, "just hear me out. It's important." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. A part of me was curious about what had become of her after everything I'd done to cut her out of my life. Another part of me wanted to see if she still regretted losing me. And perhaps there was a sliver of me that wanted to make sure she felt the weight of what she had done. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of the city where I now lived. As I drove there, my thoughts churned with conflicting emotions. I had spent years convincing myself that I was unburdened by her betrayal, that I had healed. Seeing her again felt like tearing open a wound I thought had long since scarred over. When I arrived, Charlotte was already seated at a corner table. She looked nothing like the woman I once knew. Her radiance was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to drag her down. Her hair was tied back messily, and she wore no makeup. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. She looked up as I approached, her wide eyes filled with guilt and desperation. "Alex," she said softly, her voice cracking, "thank you for coming." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat down across from her, folding my arms. "Let's get one thing straight," I said, my voice cold. "I'm not here to reconcile. Whatever you have to say, make it quick." Charlotte flinched, gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. "I understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that." "Good," I said sharply. "So what is this about?" She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the room as if afraid of being overheard. "It's about James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's in danger." I frowned, leaning back in my chair. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. "After you left, things got worse," she admitted. "Liam, the man I cheated with, didn't want anything to do with me or James. He cut me off completely. I tried to raise James on my own, but I couldn't make ends meet." Her voice cracked as she wiped her eyes. "I was desperate, Alex. I made some bad decisions. I borrowed money from the wrong people, thinking I could pay it back once I got back on my feet. but I couldn't. And now they're threatening me. They're threatening James. I stared at her, my chest tightening. You expect me to believe this? I asked, my tone full of skepticism. After everything you've done, you suddenly care about what happens to him? Or is this just another ploy to get something from me? Charlotte shook her head frantically, her eyes pleading. No, Alex, this isn't about me. It's about James. He's just a child. He didn't ask for any of this. Please, I'm begging you. Help me. For a long moment, I sat there in silence, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to get up and leave, to let her deal with the mess she had created. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But another part of me, the part that still remembered holding James for the first time, couldn't ignore what she was saying. Why me? I finally asked, my voice steady. Why come to me, of all people? You have no right to ask me for anything. Charlotte nodded, her face crumpling as fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. I know, Charlotte said, her voice breaking, but I don't have anyone else. My parents disowned me after everything came out, and my friends. They all turned their backs on me. You're the only person I can turn to, Alex. Please, for James's sake. Her words lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to despise her, to dismiss her plea as another manipulative ploy. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore the possibility that James was truly in danger. Fine, I said at last, my voice cold and firm. I'll look into it, but don't mistake this for forgiveness. I'm doing this for James, not for you. Charlotte's face crumpled with relief, and she whispered, Thank you. Thank you so much. Over the next few days, I began investigating Charlotte's claims. She provided me with names and details of the people she owed money to. A small-time criminal ring with a reputation for preying on desperate people. I used every resource I had, from old connections to online databases, to verify her story. What I uncovered was unsettling. The group she had borrowed from had a long history of violence, and their threats against her and James were alarmingly real. Charlotte had clearly gotten herself into a mess she couldn't manage. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at her predicament. She had wrecked my life, and now hers was falling apart. It felt like poetic justice, even if James was an unfortunate casualty of her mistakes. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, I found myself staring at a photograph of James that Charlotte had given me. He was 5 now, his bright blue eyes filled with the innocence of a child unaware of the chaos swirling around him. He wasn't my biological son, but he was still a child caught in the crossfire of choices that weren't his own. That realization cemented my decision. I would help James, but I would do it on my own terms. Charlotte would not manipulate me into re-entering her life. This was about James, only James. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, a private investigator named Andy, who had been invaluable during my legal battle with Charlotte. I need your help, I said firmly. It's a sensitive matter. As I hung up, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Charlotte had dragged me back into her mess, but this time, I was the one in control. If James was truly in danger, I would protect him. But Charlotte? She would live with the knowledge that I acted for James alone, not for her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning and investigation. I kept communication with Charlotte minimal and strictly on my terms. There was no chance I would let her pull me back into her chaos more than necessary. If James was in danger, I would handle it. But her other problems were hers to bear. Andy worked quickly. Within a week, he confirmed what Charlotte had told me. The group she owed money to was indeed dangerous. Their leader, a man named Chris Ruiz, had a reputation for extortion, intimidation, and violence. He wasn't someone who made empty threats. If Charlotte didn't pay, James's safety was genuinely at risk. As I absorbed this information, a pang of anger surged through me, not just at Charlotte, but at myself. How had I allowed her to drag me back into this? But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about James. I spent hours thinking through my options, determined to resolve the situation without letting Charlotte gain any power over me. I refused to be her savior, and I wouldn't let her use James as a pawn to pull me back into her life. Finally, I came up with a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it would ensure James's safety and sever the remaining ties between Charlotte and me. The next meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a park near my apartment. When I arrived, James was with her, his small hand clinging tightly to hers. He had grown since the last time I'd seen him, but his bright blue eyes were the same, filled with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. He glanced up at me and gave a shy smile. "Hi," he said softly, his voice barely audible. I crouched down to his level, forcing a smile. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice unexpectedly gentle. "You doing okay?" He nodded, but I could feel the tension in his small frame. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could sense something wasn't right. Charlotte stood nearby, watching us cautiously. "Thank you for meeting us," she said quietly. I ignored her, keeping my focus on James. "Why don't you go play on the swings for a bit?" I suggested, pointing toward the playground. James glanced up at Charlotte, as if seeking her approval. When she gave him a small nod, he let go of her hand and ran toward the playground, his small frame disappearing into a cluster of children. I turned to Charlotte, my expression hard. "I have a solution," I said bluntly, "but it doesn't involve me coming back into your life." Her brows furrowed as her hands fidgeted nervously. "What do you mean?" "I've arranged for James to stay with a foster family temporarily," I explained. "A family I personally vetted. They're good people, and they'll keep him safe while you deal with this mess you've created." Charlotte's eyes widened in panic. "You can't take him away from me," she cried, her voice rising. "He's my son." "Is he?" I shot back, my voice cold and unforgiving. "Because from where I'm standing, all you've done is put him in danger. You dragged him into this, and now you want me to clean it up? No. I'll make sure James is safe, but the consequences of your actions are yours to handle." Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the bench, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a fleeting moment, I felt a twinge of guilt, but I shoved it aside. This wasn't about her. It was about James. "Listen to me," I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for argument. "You have two choices. Let James stay with this family while you get your life together, or keep him with you and risk him getting caught in the crossfire. You know what Chris Ruiz and his people are capable of. Do you really want to gamble with your son's life?" Charlotte looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I don't know what to do," she whispered. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. "Do what's right for James, Charlotte. Not for you, for him." To my surprise, she nodded, her hands trembling. "Okay," she said, barely audible. "I'll do it. But promise me you'll make sure he's safe." I didn't respond right away. My eyes drifted toward the playground, where James was laughing as he swung higher and higher. For a moment, I felt a pang of something. Regret, maybe, or loss. I shook it off. "I'll keep my promise," I said finally, my voice resolute. "But after this, I'm done. Don't contact me again." Charlotte nodded silently, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. This time, I was in control. The following week was a whirlwind of arrangements. James was placed with a foster family, a kind, experienced couple who had raised two children of their own and were eager to help. Meanwhile, Charlotte began working with a legal aid organization to manage her debts and navigate the mess she had created. I stayed in the background, keeping tabs on everything from a distance but refusing to get directly involved. As days turned into weeks, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. James was safe, and Charlotte was left to deal with the wreckage of her choices. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from her lies, her manipulation, and the ghost of the life I had once believed in. One evening, I received a message from Charlotte. It was brief. "Thank you for helping, James." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. That chapter of my life was over, and I intended to keep it that way. Months passed after James was placed with the foster family. The quiet that followed was almost surreal. True to her word, Charlotte respected my wishes and ceased all communication. The part of me that had worried she might try to worm her way back into my life began to relax. My focus shifted fully to my own life, the one I had painstakingly rebuilt after she destroyed the first. But life, as it often does, had other plans. One evening, As I sat at my desk finishing some late work emails, my phone buzzed with a message from Andy, the private investigator. The text was short and to the point. Call me. It's about Charlotte. I frowned, my stomach twisting in unease. Against my better judgment, I dialed his number. Alex, Andy said as he answered, his tone grave. I think you need to hear this. Charlotte's situation with Ruiz has escalated. I sat up straighter, tension coursing through me. What do you mean? She hasn't been able to pay off her debts, Andy explained. Ruiz's people have started making moves. They vandalized her apartment, and she's reported being followed a few times. It's bad. I closed my eyes, running a hand through my hair. What about James? Is he still safe? Yes, Andy confirmed firmly. The foster family has been careful. Ruiz's people don't seem to know about James's placement. For now, he's completely off their radar. That was a small relief, but it did little to ease the growing dread in my chest. As much as I wanted to wash my hands of Charlotte and her problems, it was impossible to ignore the fact that her spiraling life had once again managed to drag me in. What do you suggest? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I think you should meet with Charlotte, Andy said. One last time, Andy said, his tone firm. She's desperate, Alex. And desperate people make stupid decisions. If you don't step in, she might do something reckless, something that could lead them straight to James. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside the rundown apartment complex where Charlotte now lived. The building was a far cry from the suburban home we had once shared. The walls were cracked, the paint peeling, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the air. It was a stark reminder of how far she had fallen. I knocked on her door. After a few moments, it opened just a crack, and Charlotte's face appeared, her eyes wide and bloodshot. When she saw me, her expression shifted from shock to relief. Alex, she breathed, her voice trembling. I didn't think you'd come. Let me in, I said curtly. We need to talk. She stepped aside, and I entered the small, cluttered apartment. The walls were bare, and the furniture looked like it had been scavenged from a thrift store. Charlotte motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing. What's going on? I demanded, my tone sharp. Andy told me about Ruiz. Why haven't you gotten this under control? Charlotte sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. I've tried, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been working 2 jobs, selling everything I can, but it's not enough. They keep adding interest to what I owe. I don't know what else to do. Her desperation was palpable, but I forced myself to stay detached. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, anger seeping into my voice. You had months to figure this out, Charlotte. Months. Tears streamed down her face as she answered. I didn't want to drag you back into this. You made it clear you didn't want anything to do with me. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. Alex, I'm scared. They won't stop until they get what they want. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Charlotte's problems weren't mine anymore, but James's safety was. If Ruiz's people got to Charlotte, it was only a matter of time before they learned about James's placement. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice cold and firm. I'll deal with Ruiz. But after that, we're done. For good. Charlotte looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes. You'll help me? I'm not doing this for you, I snapped. I'm doing this to make sure James stays safe. Don't mistake my involvement for anything more than that. She nodded quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thank you so much. The next week was a whirlwind of calculated moves. With Andy's help, I reached out to a mediator who specialized in resolving disputes with dangerous people like Ruiz. The process was tense and involved backdoor negotiations and a hefty payment to settle Charlotte's debts. I paid the amount out of pocket, seeing it as a necessary cost to ensure James's safety. It wasn't justice, it was survival. When the deal was finalized, Ruiz and his people backed off. Charlotte was safe, at least for now, but I knew better than to believe she could be trusted with a second chance. I met Charlotte one last time to deliver the news. She looked at me with gratitude and something else, something that might have been regret. You saved me, she said softly. I'll never forget what you've done for me and James. I shook my head, my voice resolute. I didn't do this for you, Charlotte, and I won't be here to save you next time. This is the last time you'll see me. She opened her mouth to respond, but I turned and walked away before she could say another word. For the first time in years, I felt free, truly free. As I drove away, I thought about James, the boy I had once believed was my son. He deserved better than the chaos Charlotte had brought into his life. I hoped he would grow up happy and safe, far away from the shadow of his mother's mistakes. As for me, I had finally closed the chapter on Charlotte for good. It was time to move forward, to build a life unburdened by her lies and betrayals. Justice hadn't come in a courtroom, but it had come nonetheless. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.